What family secret was finally split in your family?
Experience 1. My parents got divorced when I was about 3 years old. I stayed in contact with my mother, but my father got full custody, as mom apparently relinquished custody because of her financial situation and claimed she made the difficult decision of giving custody to my dad for the sake of us kids because he could provide a better life for us. The most difficult sacrifice she ever made. On several occasions, my mother would also get drunk and lament her life and say something to the effect of,
I never should have left your father. He was a good guy. He didn't deserve that. We would have been happy.
I had heard variations on it a bunch of times, so one day I decided to share it with my dad. I was in my mid-20s at that point. My dad, who at no point in my life ever discussed the divorce or my mom, replied,
She said that?
Yeah.
I left her because of her alcoholism and substance use and how she was always drunk during the pregnancy and while you were little. Kids deserve a safe home to grow up in.
I later got that verified from my maternal grandmother. Everyone knew but never bothered to tell me that my dad was the one who left mom because she was a druggie and an alcoholic, and she didn't have to make the difficult sacrifice of giving dad custody because he could provide a better life for us. The court straight up gave dad custody after a court battle where my mom was deemed unfit to be a parent because of said substance abuses. For about 20 years, I thought my dad got dumped by my mom, but turns out, he was just a really good parent and made the right choice for us kids. Experience 2. My great-aunt was a nurse supervisor at a mental hospital in the 1920s. She fell in love with a guy who was being evaluated for a murder trial. She helped him escape and they went to Florida. But the police caught up with them. My aunt got off easy, but he got the electric chair. I found all this in a newspaper archive while working on family history. Showed it to my mom and she admitted it was all true. Experience 3. My sister and I found out in our mid/late 20s that we had a full-on brother. Our dad got our mom pregnant in high school, and because it was the 60s it was all hush-hush, and she went to do her senior year with family and just quietly came back to town. They ended up getting together for real in college and no one knew, not their lifelong friends or even my uncle. Our brother had a good childhood with his adoptive family, but he was always curious about his birth mother, so he wrote her a letter. He sure was surprised to also come to meet his dad and 2 sisters. The crazy thing is he didn't live too far away, and we all look extremely alike. Would have been weird if we'd bumped into each other otherwise. Experience 4. My uncle was a cop. My father was a mid-level substance kingpin. He basically ran the marijuana and psychedelics trade in a small city. When I was a kid, my uncle died in the line of duty. There was a big funeral and everything. Turns out he wasn't killed in the line of duty. The cops found out that my father was paying him for cop information. When he was accused, my uncle ate a gun in his squad car in a parking lot. I found out 30 years later. Experience 5. At age 43, I learned I had a half-sister. My father had an affair, and she was conceived after my brother was born, but before I was. She reached out to me and is a lovely human. We have been in contact ever since, have traveled together, and I have visited her several times. Experience 6. My junkie uncle revealed the sheer amount of crime that he and his junkie mates would commit to help my dad and his business. My dad had them steal from other competitors, stealing tools and wrecking their work sites. They would steal documents relating to competitors who were bidding for their same jobs. They would steal company cars and burn them so they could claim the insurance money. The funniest was that my dad threw a tantrum on site since they all called him the fat controller. My uncle said,
You pay me $50 a week and I'll fix that for you since you wanted to be such a little witch.
My dear mom, ignorant as hell, thought my dad was putting extra effort in to get healthy. Turns out my uncle was just making custom capsule tablets with tiny amounts of meth on them, and my dad was losing weight faster than ever. It's a drop in the ocean compared to some other comments, but my dad always portrays himself as some holier-than-thou authority. He's such a closet crook. Edit 1. I seriously thought this one small sliver of my family chaos would be ignored, but I wanted to list off some other random wild crap they get up to for your entertainment. There's no doubt my uncle had a terrible childhood, being spoiled as the youngest child, and then institutionally abused as a child in boarding school. His life spun into chaos and his substance dependence followed. My immediate family started their adult lives, and the number of bridges burned between either friend and or working relationships is like Mr. Incredible seeing the rolling list of supers killed by Syndrome's robot. It's mind-blowing that my family can even still show their face in public. My dad would set up fake-looking building firms and pretend that he was tendering for a huge job, getting all local builders and subcontractors to give him their prices as they were bidding for massive jobs. Really, he just wanted to get their prices to undercut them or have them think they can't take on other jobs, thinking they had a big amount of work in the pipeline. When my dad was in his late teens, my grandparents offered him a world trip. He said no, and that he wanted to stay and look after the family farm, as he wanted to practice running everything. My grandparents then left a sizable amount of money for the day-to-day items and left clear expectations. It was a very successful farm, and upon returning they found everything in complete and utter ruins, with all the money being spent on a huge V8 engine that was slapped into my dad's car. They had to deal with all the locals telling stories of my dad chasing prostitutes in his loud death machine while completely ignoring the farm. My dad was given $400,000 in the 90s to buy a very nice piece of land. That's worth almost $1 million adjusted for inflation. My dad has not paid back a cent. This one is hard because even with his silver spoon shoved up his ass, none of that was used to treat us kids. It all went into the land itself and his whimsical business ideas. Our kids had a family trust set up, and I found paperwork not long ago showing all of it withdrawn through many legal loopholes and trips to the solicitor to have it withdrawn, and used to bail him out of yet another crap idea of his. He somehow snaked his way into obtaining other money from wills, and none of it has been used to help his adult kids. I haven't even started on the crap my mom gets up to. How they are still married is something that would break the minds of the world's greatest psyches. Experience 7. My great-grandfather was a huge financial success in the 1920s, owned a bunch of businesses, pillar of the community type, and half the town worked for him. Built himself a huge mansion at the edge of town with all the modern conveniences. Lost everything in the stock market crash of the Great Depression, went out on his front porch, sat in a chair, and blew his head off with a shotgun. Everybody was involved in covering it up, not just the family, but the local authorities and the newspapers too. His obituary even said that he had died of natural causes, though the whole town knew better. It was passed down as legend for generations that he had died young of natural causes, though no one ever mentioned why the family was suddenly poor. I found an entry in my great-grandmother's diary long after she had passed where she wrote about the whole episode. Experience 8. When my parents got married, it was because my mom got pregnant with my brother. That's not the secret, everybody has always known that. Mom's parents practically kicked her out of the house. My dad had already left for the Air Force. He had to fly back for a quickie wedding after basic. This was the early 1960s, so still a bit scandalous. Mom ended up moving in with her new in-laws so she could finish her last year of college before joining my dad in Texas and later Japan. 20-some years later, everyone was preparing for my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. Mom's parents, the ones who kicked her out for getting pregnant without being married. My grandma got really upset and said, "We can't celebrate 50, we've only been married 49 years. This was a shock to everyone because my mom's oldest brother was 50. Turns out that if they had gotten married, my grandpa would have been kicked out of high school, so they hid the pregnancy/baby until he graduated. After enough time had passed, they just told everyone the earlier date. Even though they did the exact same thing, they couldn't bring themselves to show any sympathy for their own daughter in that situation. Experience 9. My mother did 23andMe and found that she matched with an unknown niece who looked exactly like her older brother. Her brother had an extramarital affair and had a baby without his knowledge. He passed away some 30 years ago when the baby was around 10. Experience 10. We did an ancestry DNA test and found out my dad has a half-sister. Turns out Grandpa had been seeing her mother on the side for probably more than a decade and also had at least one other long-term affair. Experience 11. My defector uncle, he and my aunt never married but have been together since well before I was born, with a few hiccups, has a child with another woman. It became common knowledge when the girl was 6 and was starting to understand the situation. At first, it was a bit scandalous, but she's been welcomed with open arms by my entire family, including her half-siblings' maternal grandparents. She's treated the same as all the other kids her age. Her half-sister, my cousin, has a daughter the same age and they're best friends, go to the same high school, totally inseparable, technically aunt and niece, haha. She comes to all our family events and she's an awesome kid. We're all stoked to have her in our family. Experience 12. My mom was having an affair with a schizophrenic dude she met in a bar, got pregnant and just let her husband believe I was his child my whole life. When she was sick in the hospital and looped out of substances, she started mumbling about my dad not being my real dad. 23andMe test later and secrets out. Experience 13. I found one out myself. My great-great-grandfather spent years in prison for vacationing off the Comstock Act. Anthony Comstock himself testified in 1904 at the trial that it was the largest collection of adult explicit video he had ever seen. LOL, damn, Grandpa. Experience 14. My great-aunt was a prostitute. Her husband, my great-uncle, was a John. I guess this wasn't super shocking to the older generation or her siblings. But to my age group, we just knew her as a sweet old lady and my uncle as a gruff but kind-hearted old man, so that was sort of a strange thought. Experience 15. The story was always that my 2 cousins were adopted and not related to each other even. People sometimes would ask them if they were twins. They would say nope, we're adopted. Somehow it got out that their bio mom was their younger aunt. The older sister adopted and raised both girls as her own. Younger aunt/mom got married and started a family before all this came out too. It was a wild journey. I have heard this is common in Catholic families. They hide the illegitimate pregnancy and someone in the family adopts the child or pretends it is an older married family member's child. This was in the early 80s, so I guess it was possible to get away with it. Experience 16. My brother was on a TV show called Top Cops. Real-life police stories. Anyway, after it aired, he got a phone call from a woman in California, we are Canadian, who recognized our unusual family name. She told him that she was the illegitimate daughter of my grandfather on my dad's side. News to us. Anyway, my dad had already passed, as did his parents, but it was an interesting story. Experience 17. My mom's family is Appalachian Mountain folk. Elle has Native American features. So, Elle asked my mom, and got told vehemently that I'm 100% white. So, after my mom died, I was going through stuff. Found out that not only was her grandmother, my great-grandmother, Cherokee, but my biological father was also. I found a wonderful picture of my tiny Cherokee gum standing hand in hand with my incredibly tall Welsh Gap. I treasure that picture. Experience 18. In 8th grade, I had to do a family tree, which required that I call my grandparents who were 1,200 miles away to ask them about their parents. I got to have 2 great-grandparents, but I didn't know much about the others. My grandmother told me that the man we all thought to be her dad was actually her stepfather. My dad and his siblings didn't even know. She was conceived illegitimately, and when her biological father found out, he moved to another state and got married. She never met him. She was born in 1928, and this conception and being fatherless was shameful. Later in life, my grandma had dementia. She couldn't remember what she had for breakfast, but she talked about her horrible childhood. My grandma was in her 80s and a devout Catholic who didn't talk about intercourse, but she told me her stepfather R-worded her repeatedly. She wept and told me about what she had to tell my grandpa on their wedding night, to not expect blood. My grandpa was the sweetest man in the world, and he told her it didn't matter and the times with her stepfather didn't count as far as he was concerned. It was a little icky but more heartbreaking, and all these years I've wondered why she picked me to tell these things to. I'm the oldest of 13 grandchildren and she had 5 kids. I went on to become a therapist, and my grandparents were married a few months shy of 70 years when my grandma died. Experience 19. My grandmother called the cops on my grandpa for domestic violence. He was arrested. During his trial, he was sentenced to either jail or he could join the military. He joined the Navy and was stationed in New York. While in New York, he met another woman, got married to her, while still being married to my grandma, and had an entirely new family. After his discharge, he came back home and resumed life with my grandma, never to speak to the New York family again. As an added twist, when he got back home, he was surprised to find he had a new 2-year-old daughter. This was a shock since he had been gone for around 5 years. As far as I know, my aunt's real father has remained a mystery. I don't know an exact timeline, but this was sometime in the 40s or possibly early 50s. My mom was born in 56 and, by then, all the dust had settled. She didn't know any of this story until she was an adult. Experience 20. My mom might not actually be my biological mother. I'm a surrogate baby and was told my entire life that even though my mom didn't birth me, I am 100% biologically my parents' kid. Well, I've been wanting to get one of those 23andMe things done because I thought learning more about my family could be cool, but my mom was super against it. She kept referencing the Golden State Killer as her argument for the government using my DNA against me or someone else in the family, and I was like,
Mom, they caught a serial killer. I'm pretty sure that's a good thing.
Also, she's not a conspiracy nut in any other way than specifically this, so I thought her reaction was very odd. Anyway, I was out grabbing a drink with my dad a few weeks ago and I was like,
Hey, by the way, why is Mom so weird about me getting a 23 in my test?
and he explained that actually donor eggs were in the mix because my mom's eggs weren't taken, so there's about a 50-50th chance I am not biologically related to my mom, and my mom's a bit freaked about me finding out. I don't actually care, my mom is my mom 100%, I'm just curious about my genealogy. I also want to have kids eventually and would very much like to know if there's anything I should be looking out for. Not a super dramatic thing, I mean I guess it is to my mom but not to me. I'm not traumatized by this, and actually, it kind of makes sense because I look exactly like my dad, but the few features that aren't my dad's aren't my mom's either. I don't look like her side of the family at all. The only thing my mom and I have in common is that we're both blonde, but my dad is also blonde so.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.